Joseph, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
That's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about the early days of Judo Bank? I mean, I know you started around 2016. So have you been surprised by how quickly it's grown? No doubt it's been a long journey as well at the same time, but tell us a little bit about that from start till now.
Well, I mean, starting any new business is a challenging exercise. I mean, people look at successful businesses and they think it's relatively straightforward, but of course, people who have built businesses know that that's not the case. But particularly building a bank, because banking is quite a regulated industry and it's a very capital intensive industry, and there hadn't been a new bank in Australia for decades. So when we started thinking in 2016 about building what is today Judo Bank, we knew that the prospects of failure were quite high. I mean, everybody that we spoke to said that 90% of all startups of this nature will fail. And therefore you should brace yourself for the likelihood of failure. But we were confident that we had done our homework and we had built a robust business case. We were a deeply experienced management team, and I had 35 years in the banking industry many years at senior executive level. And I had a philosophy in building the bank that of measure twice, cut once. So yep. careful preparation, thinking through the risks, making sure that we had ways of managing the risks. And, you know, the proof of the pudding is that we've now got a very successful bank, but it was a roller coaster journey. I mean, we've got a bank today that's worth well over $1.5 billion, still a young growing bank. But I wouldn't want to paint a picture of a smooth journey from a PowerPoint idea in 2016 to a bank that now is across the country and has lent out over $9 billion to small, mid-sized businesses. It was a roller coaster journey of many days and weeks of sleepless nights, dark tunnels with no lights at the end, walls closing in, running out of money, all of the things that you would associate with what was then a high-risk venture.
And how was it in the early days, especially, but even now, trying to win customers, especially in the Australian market, which Aussies really have a love-hate relationship with the big banks, right? They all hate them, but then they all stick with them in a lot of cases, and there's a lot of inertia there. Yeah. In terms of just the stats of how many people are with those banks on various levels. How difficult was, penetrating that love-hate relationship with the customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was one of those things that we spent a lot of time researching at the beginning, obviously, as did our investors. But Judo Bank is what I describe as a pure play specialist bank, in that all we do is bank the small to mid-sized business economy. So we don't deal with large businesses and we don't deal with people like you and I. We are a pure business bank. Now, I knew from all of my experience that there are so many small and mid-sized businesses were deeply frustrated with the poor service that they were getting from the banks. And, after the GFC, when the banking industry consolidated and the big four became 85% of the market, there was very little to differentiate one from the other than the brand. The service was equally poor, no matter which of the big banks you went to. And so we were quite confident that if we could develop a proposition that addressed the frustration that small and mid-sized businesses have, and given just how complacent and, if I can use a term, arrogant the big banks were towards small to mid-sized businesses, that we had a fair chance of building something and tapping into a raw nerve that existed in the market. And that proved to be the case. The big issue for us was not so much could we attract customers, it was could we attract bankers? Because we wanted to go back to old-fashioned, unashamedly old-fashioned relationship banking, where you had an experienced banker sitting across the table from the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, and seeking to understand what the business was trying to do, and then seeing how the bank could help them. Now, that might sound like a pretty standard business proposition, but the world had changed quite aggressively in that so many small businesses were being pointed into call centers or dealing with faceless people or dealing with algorithms. The computer said no. And there was a real frustration in the small, mid-sized market for the ability to deal with to speak to somebody who could, first of all, listen to you and understand what you wanted to do, and then had enough experience and skills to say, yeah, we can help you. So we knew that that would work. And it did. I mean, we started up, we got our banking license in 2009, April 2019. We needed to raise $1.5 billion of capital, which we did. We've now got close to 600 staff across the country. We've got a lending out to small businesses of, I mentioned, just over $9 billion. I was confident that if we could get the right staff, because I do believe in a world that's become so faceless and so digitalized, and digital technology are really important, but when it comes to dealing with small businesses, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker wants to speak to a person that listens.
Because it's become so impersonal, right? What's happened with the improvements with technology have made it more impersonal because it goes down the path of scale.
Correct. Now, I was confident that we could build a bank that was capable of scale, but still provide that high touch model. So we call it high touch, high tech. So because we started from a blank piece of paper, we weren't burdened with the legacy of donkey's years of technology and infrastructure, but we wanted to build a bank that allowed our bankers to spend 75% of their time dealing with customers and not 75% of the time dealing with the complexity of the organization, a big organization. And so that's why we said, let's build a technology-enabled business, but that had a human face to it. And that's high touch, high tech. And that formula works. People, I look at our customer satisfaction, which in banking language is a measure called NPS. Our NPS score at Judo Bank is plus 66. And if you look at the average of the 4 major banks, their NPS score, the average is -5.
Right.
It's a huge gap because big businesses have lost sight of the fact that a lot of customers want to deal with a human being, not with a telephone link or online banking is important, but when it comes to making big decisions about should I invest money, should I buy something, should I sell something, they want to speak to somebody who exercises judgment, not algorithms.
And how did that process go in the early days in terms of you're starting with a blank canvas in effect, right? And creating what a new bank looked like.
Yep.
How do you go in terms of things like culture and how you want the culture to be, and having robust systems and compliance in place, but not being burdened with bureaucracy?
Brilliant. Yeah.
How do you go from that?
Right. That is a absolutely critical question, because it's a question that I grapple with as the company grows. At the end of the day, $1 from Judo in the bank account of a small to mid-sized business is no different from $1 from one of the major banks. The key is the experience leading up to that dollar hitting your bank account. What was it like dealing with Judo Bank? And it's not a question of products, it's a question, or systems, it's a question of culture. It's because culture is an intangible thing, and it's how did it feel to do business with Judo Bank? And for me, that was always going to be a question of culture, and how we could develop a culture that was deeply customer centric, that didn't talk about products. It talked about how we could meet customer needs and how we could be fast in our decision making. So once getting to a decision within 5 working days rather than 5 weeks,
right,
was key to us. And I was motivated by a story of a company, which is a well-known company today called Enterprise Car Rentals, and it was started in 1957 by a guy called Jack Taylor, who was in his late 40s then, and he had worked in the car hire industry. And he started this company called Enterprise Car Rentals with 17 cars in the United States. And now this was an industry dominated by giants like the Avises and the Hertz and the other names that you could think of.
Yeah.
And all they were doing was a car rental, which is no different once you sit in the car, whether you're driving a Hertz car or a Avis car or an Enterprise car. But the difference was the experience. That when the customer called or went up to the counter, they felt there was a real engagement and a speed of getting from "can I have a car" to "here's the car keys."
Yeah, okay.
Yep. And now today, Enterprise Car Rentals is larger in market cap than the 4 big giants added together.
Yeah, okay.
And all it does is provide rental cars. So I was motivated by that idea that our dollar is no different from the dollar of a big bank once it's in the bank account, but the experience can be so different. That you say to if you're a small business that's just had a loan from Judo, that you contact your network and say, look, if the next time you're looking to borrow, speak to Judo Bank, because this is all they specialize in small businesses. They have deeply experienced bankers who understand this stuff. And they exercise judgment, not strict one-size-fits-all rigid policies.
Yeah, there's a major difference, right? Because the big banks have gone more and more to a cookie cutter style system, which, I mean, you look at the GFC, even post that, they just cut some types of lending on properties and things like that, things that might have been viable, but it just left big gaps in the market because they just said this is too hard from a risk point of view. And so they just stopped. So how do you put that into place and manage it as you get to scale?
Well, we've got to manage that carefully because the history of small businesses as they grow is that they start to see diminishing culture, that they, particularly in a banking business which is regulated.
Yeah.
And the way that we're regulated is no different from the way the big banks are regulated. So you've got to manage that in a way that you don't allow you mentioned bureaucracy, and I think about bureaucracy a lot. Now, I draw a distinction when I think about bureaucracy, and I talk about this a lot. It's a bit like cholesterol. You bad cholesterol. So you've got to have some healthy, good bureaucracy because we're a bank.
Yep.
But you don't want your arteries clogged up with bad cholesterol that makes you slow moving and puts in danger the whole entity. So managing that really carefully is really what I spend the vast majority of my time thinking about and working on. How can we grow Judo from a $9 billion bank to a $30 billion bank in the next 3 or 4 years, but maintain the unique culture that's allowed it to be successful thus far, and not allow the culture, going back to my cholesterol analogy, not allowing bad cholesterol to clog up the arteries of the company and make it bureaucratic.
That's a great analogy, and you can apply that to so many aspects of compliance and regulation. You do need it, but you can go to either end of the spectrum and it goes too far. You can be too light or too heavy, like you say, and you can. That's a great analogy. I really like that one.
Yeah, well, it's how we think about running the company. We'll add another 100 staff over the next 12 months, and then another 100 or so. And as you're adding people and as you're growing, how do you protect the unique culture that's allowed the company to get to where it is today? As I keep on saying to people, it's not about Judo's products, It's not about the money that we lend, because that, once it's in the bank account, it's the same as anybody else's money. It's the experience our customers feel when they do business with us. That's what counts, and that's cultural. That's cultural.
Yeah. And when you first started the business, and in terms of you've been with big banks in the past, and as I think I read in one of the, you've also put out a book called Black Belt, which sort of goes through the journey of judo. And I read a couple of blurbs in there, and one of them was around how you described yourselves as not being, what was the wording? No spring chickens when you started. So, and you've been in the banks that whole time. How did you go when you started the business, running a business all of a sudden? Totally different ball game.
Hugely different. I'd spent all of my career inside big banks. I worked in 5 big banks, 2 of them here and 3 overseas. We had huge bureaucracies, you know, and thousands of staff and all sorts of people to help you. Some not so helpful, but they were there.
Yeah.
And then the idea then in you know, in the early to mid 50s of saying, let's build a new bank. Yeah. Knowing that the risk of failure was 90%, there or thereabouts, but let's give it a go. And the reason why myself and David Honore and Chris Bayliss and a couple of others decided to give it a go had a lot to do with wanting to live a life of purpose and a life fulfilled. You know, I could have stopped working or continued working in big banks and lived quite comfortably. And, you know, in 10 years' time, sit down on a Friday afternoon with my gin and tonic on the porch and think life has been good. But I wouldn't have thought like that. I would have said, I wish that I had done this. Yeah. It's a life unfulfilled. So it was that burning sense of purpose, of wanting to give it a go, believing that there was a big market opportunity, yep, knowing how banks work, because having lived all our lives in it, that we had a good chance of making it work. But it was going to be a very, very tough journey, you know. And we had 86 meetings 4 times around the world before we got the first dollar. You know, because people kept on saying to us, we like what you're trying to do, and we like you guys. You've got loads of experience, but you're never going to get it up because the big 4 banks will just kill you, yeah, or customers won't do business with you. Now there was one meeting in London with a guy called Joe Gianamori, who was a very experienced investor. He's a good friend, and he was very helpful. He said, "Look, you guys have got a good business plan here, but the chances of you succeeding are very slim. You could get another job inside a big bank, you make a couple $1 million a year and live a nice life. Why do you want to take this risk?" And we kind of said, look, we want to give this a go because otherwise there's going to be this big question in the future about what might have been. And then he said, look, don't take this the wrong way. Don't take this the wrong way, but you're no spring chickens, right? Because
fair enough.
You never think you never think about these things, but he was being nice. He wasn't being offensive. He says, "Look, you're not spring chickens. Why do you want to put all of the 35 years of hard work and you know the savings that you've built up? Why would you want to put that at risk?" So that did make us think about it. We are no spring chickens, but we're going to make this work.
Yeah. And when you then go out to, you're running a business, now you've got to presumably take on investment, that sort of stuff. And how did that go initially? I mean, was it met with, you know, people like the idea, but skepticism in terms of the ability to make it successful, not because of your own ability, but because of the market forces? The banks want to crush you. People might be that inertia with customers. How did that go?
That's exactly what we got. I mean, we had 86 meetings because we kept every meeting we went to, we kept notes.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
What was the feedback? Because there's never a bad meeting. We had 86 meetings, and people said, like the business case, like you guys, come back when you made $1. Like the business case, like you guys, you'll never get off the ground. And so we kept on hearing no, well, people said no, but we kept on hearing maybe. And the maybe was that I kept on saying, like, the fact that you've got 86 meetings with some really quite influential people tells you there's something here. You've just got to try and convince them that whilst the market is dominated by 4 big giants, customers don't like them. Small businesses just do not like them.
Yep.
And so if you can develop a credible alternative that's well capitalized, because we were very clear, we didn't go and say, look, we want to raise 10 million or 20 million. We said, look, this business is going to need $1.5 billion of equity over 4.5 years in stages before it gets to a stage of generating its own profits. So we're very clear about that. And that was the other thing, actually. You got more chance of getting a meeting if you're asking for $1 billion than you have if you're asking for 10.
Yep.
Yep. With serious people, serious people. We say, we've got a business idea. We need $1.5 billion. And they say, okay, come and talk to us.
Yeah.
But you had to be resilient. I mean, we went around the world, let's say 4 times, 86 knockbacks. We couldn't get anybody in Australia interested because they knew the market was controlled by big giants. People overseas said, well, why don't you guys get investment locally first? What did the local guys know that, that they're not supporting you? But we kept on going. We kept on going. People said no, but we heard maybe. We went back. We went around the world, met people 3 or 4 times. We put our own money into it. It was very important that we, mortgaged our homes, sold off some investments, put serious skin in the game so that people could see that we were truly committed to this. And then eventually, and I'll never forget this, it was in New York. I won't mention the name of the firm because they might be embarrassed by it, but we went to see these guys at a leading investment bank. It's about 4:15, and we had a meeting till about 5 o'clock. And then they said, look, what are you guys doing afterwards? We said, we're going to go and have a beer and then go and have some dinner. And they said, look, we'll join you for a beer. So these 4 guys came down, relatively good guys, came down. We had 2 or 3 beers and we had a steak. And they said, look, we're in. We'll put 20 mil in if you can get another 4 parties to put 20 mil in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the big breakthrough, because then you got 20 mil.
Yeah.
You can talk to, Now, the reason I mention that story is that deal was done after 45 minutes of a formal meeting and 2 hours of drinking beer.
Yep.
Right? And so the point is that investors are different. Some are very serious. Some want detailed information packs. What people are really doing is looking at, they talk about the jockey and the horse. The horse is the business case. And the jockey are the people behind the business case. Now, if the business case is an old nag, it doesn't matter how good the jockeys are. But if the business case is half decent, they look at the jockey and say, yeah, you know how to ride this horse, and you've got a good chance of winning. And so the people got to know us, and they said, look, yeah, we think you know what you're doing. We get it. We will back you guys. And then it just took off from there.
And so that's really interesting. So because the importance of relationships and forming rapport with people is at all levels, right? So important.
Absolutely.
And presumably they obviously thought this was good from the formal meeting, but then afterwards, so that closing that investment, it hinged on them having a few beers with you, not the beers themselves, but it's the getting to know you phase.
Correct.
And then it's because that's 2 more hours or longer of really drilling down, getting to see the type of people you are, that sort of thing. It's a whole different dynamic to the interviews, right? That you just can't do in a boardroom setting.
Yeah, or delivering a lengthy document, a business case, because they're sterile documents,
Yes.
Or a PowerPoint. I think at the end of the day, people want to be able to look at you and say, yeah, these people know what they're doing, and they're serious people, and they know how it works. So you make a great point about, in a world that's become so dehumanized, become so digitalized.
Yeah.
big things happen face to face.
Yeah. Well, it was the same philosophy in terms of your business, really, wasn't it? It's the same. Your own customers want to deal with somebody face to face. It makes sense that your investors would, and the relationship you build there was going to be done not just face to face, but in a more in a deeper relationship side of things, from a business perspective, to really get to know who they're dealing with.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
Fascinating. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it. Big believer in building relationships, because and getting a feel for the individuals involved. When we're lending money to a small business, we won't look at the financials. We want to know the business owners and say, do they, you're exercising judgment. Do these people know what they're doing? How committed are they? Are their plans sensible? Then let's have a look at the numbers.
Yeah, and that's harder to or not harder to customize. That's harder to put a cookie cutter type around it, which is why the big banks don't do it, right? Is because it's very hard to get that. That comes with experience in your bankers and knowing and been around for a long time to understand how it all works.
Yep. Well, but that's the way the banking system used to work.
Yes. Yeah.
Before it industrialized and centralized and became product driven, and it became depersonalized, and and customers were given very little to choose from. That was one big bank or another big bank, and it was the same experience. And that was why we felt that the small mid-sized business economy is so important to Australia. They get such a poor service from the big banks, that if you could build something that was clearly sustainable, clearly scalable, that was well capitalized, and run by people who really knew the business, that there was every chance of being successful.
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. It's funny because you talk about the banking system, how it used to be, or the bank industry, how it used to be. I remember when my wife and I went and bought, and it's a different type of lending, but I remember when we went and bought our first place 30 years ago, or not quite 30, 27 years ago, and you'd wear nice clothes and go see the bank manager, and they were wearing a suit, and you'd be putting on your best face, and you were sort of interviewed, and hopefully they liked you enough to say yes. It was a different ballgame. You didn't just send it online or whatever. You had to it was like a job interview, but for your home loan.
Yeah. There was an old joke when I was starting off in banking, is that you'd go to see the bank manager and you'd ask him how you stand for a loan, and he'd say, "You don't stand, you kneel."
Yeah. But often it's all gone now. Now it's like they want distribution and they want to get the money out the door. It's a different ballgame. But
but lending money to people, in particular, I think particularly businesses, small businesses, you want to make sure that they've thought through the risks, because you can ruin somebody's life by lending money that they shouldn't really be borrowing, or at least borrowing as much. It's not just a question of a business going bust. When a business goes bust, there's families behind a business. And I'm very conscious of that. I mean, being responsible in the way that you lend money is important. And saying sometimes to a business, look, I don't think this is a good idea, or 5 million's too much. The right number should be 3, or whatever. You're thinking about their interests as well as the bank's interest.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. From when you started till now, what's the biggest thing that you've learned from when you sort of started day one versus now?
Well, I think you learn over time that leadership is a privilege, and it's a huge responsibility, and you cast a long shadow when you're a leader in a business, and you got to act responsibly. You've got to be able to make tough decisions, but you've got to be able to develop a culture where people feel safe and where people can grow, and people feel confident in being able to put their hand up. You've got to be decisive in an industry that is indecisive, where it's slow moving. So I think being decisive, using your gut, the old head, heart, and gut thing is something I learned 20 odd years ago, and it's as relevant today as it was, as ever has been, that you've got your instincts will tell you things, and you know, if you've got a doubt about something, there's no doubt about it, right? Because your gut's telling you something, and back your gut instincts. Surround yourself with good people. You've got to be confident in yourself that, you know, if you've got good people, every bit as good as you, if not better, it makes life so much easier. So if your ability to attract high caliber people and feel comfortable yourself that you're leading for a reason, and good people want to work with you, I think the ability to do that is so important. I think also an important lesson for me is start with the end in mind. Whenever you're doing something, whether that's starting a business or in an established business, you think about the future of the business. Go forward 3 to 5 years and say, what do I want this to look like? And then work from there. And then the ability to get off the busy dance floor of the day-to-day and go up onto the balcony and just take stock of where things are at and how things are looking and moving, so that you reflect on the progress that you're making. Now, if you stay on the busy dance floor of the day-to-day, you can miss big things. So it's the ability to kind of get off that dance floor onto the balcony, reflect a little bit how well things are going, what should I be changing, if anything, and work towards that vision, which is, you know, there's another way of talking about starting with the end in mind. So those are the things that are quite important for me. You know, there's no magic formula there. Leadership means lots of different things, but for me, in running a bank, having a strong sense of where we're heading and how we're going to get there, spending enough time on the balcony and not getting lost on the dance floor, and having really good people. And you need to be resilient. I think that's an often underestimated quality in somebody. You know, the ability to say, look, I mean, when you've been experienced in life, you know that there's going to be days when things are going to go horribly wrong, right? And
there's ebbs and flows.
Yeah, but just be measured, because people are looking at you. You know, if you've got a something goes horribly wrong, they want calmness, they want reassurance that we're going to get this fixed. No panic. There could be panic inside, right?
Yeah. It's the display. They're gonna. It's important what they see in you from the outside is important, right?
Absolutely, and the confidence that will fix it.
Yeah, and in terms of some of the battles along the way, no doubt there's been many, but some of the more obvious ones in recent times, obviously COVID, and also in the last, earlier this year, we had those the banking issue in the US with Silicon Valley Bank and those sorts of things. Those sorts of things, when they happen, how do you approach that? How do you what's your first instinct to tackle that and talk to your people and that sort of stuff?
Well, I've always been a believer in, I'm not sure whether this was former US President Barack Obama or one of his advisors, but someone said, never waste a crisis. And the thing is that in the banking industry, as soon as there's any whiff of crisis in the environment, COVID or whatever it might be, the drawbridges get pulled up, the shutters come down, and everything's off. And then a lot of good businesses get stranded. And so I do genuinely believe that in crisis environments, if you hold your nerve and you're quite strategic, quite measured, you can actually turn a crisis into an opportunity. And I have always believed that. And I never, you don't want to live in a world of crisis, but Judo got its banking license in April 2019. And then COVID hit these shores in March 2020, and we've never really been out of a crisis. It's been COVID, and now we're in an economic crisis, but you know, I kind of feel that Judo's a bank that was born in crisis, and it plays to the strengths of the management team that there's opportunities in crisis environments, because there are always good businesses out there, and the banks, because of the cookie cutter approach, just pull back.
I read in that in your book Black Belt, I read these key lessons. They are: find and stick to your niche. One, act like a David and succeed as the underdog against Goliath. Be 100% clear on your purpose, and continuously work on your culture. My question is, if you had to pick one of those, which one would you say is the most important?
The culture.
Right. Okay. So that would be the focus. If you could only pick one, that would be it.
That would be it. Because everything else becomes second order if the culture is not where you want it to be.
Yeah.
And you can kind of think about a business where people are not talking to each other, where nobody's interested in the customer, they're interested in politics. You know, a great culture allows you to solve all sorts of problems. A bad culture just creates all sorts of problems. So it's culture, culture, and culture.
What would you say your biggest strength is as a leader?
My biggest strength would be my vision and resilience. That when and it's a personal characteristic, that when I start something, I mean, I think about things carefully. So I measure twice and cut once.
Yeah.
But once I made my mind up to do something, I will see it through. So I think the resilience, the sense of vision about what I'm looking at Judo in 26, 27 right now, the decisions that we're making and the investments we're making today are not about Judo next year. They're about Judo in 3 or 4 years from now.
Yeah.
And then the resilience to kind of execute on that vision or the strategy, and not to be distracted, not to be put off. I think I would say those are our personal characteristics that are quite a key part of the way that I lead.
In terms of when you first started out, especially, what was your biggest weakness, I guess, and how did you overcome that?
Well, the biggest weakness was that we'd never done this before, right? Because we'd all worked in big giants of companies, and in big giant companies you can go hiding. It's very easy to start blaming other people and have meetings all day long and write big memos. So the biggest weakness is that we were embarking on building a bank from a PowerPoint or an idea that we'd never done before. But it goes back to resilience, and it goes back to belief. You've got to back yourself, and if you've thought about it carefully and you believe you can do it, go for it. Don't have a plan B. That was the other thing about building Judo. No plan B, right? Now, in most walks of life, people say you have to have a plan B, and I get that. But when you're doing something like this, it's too tempting to go to plan B when plan A looks difficult. So one plan only, and make it happen.
Yeah, you're all in, and there's no turning around. Fair enough. I get that. What's the best advice you were given along the way?
Well, I think the best advice, make sure that we're a customer-centric bank, that we stay close to the customer, that we choose our shareholders carefully. That was really important. When you're trying to raise money, and particularly if you've had 86 knockbacks, there's always a temptation to take the first dollar that comes its way. But when you take money from people, you're taking more than their money. You're taking them.
Yep.
and they can have agendas that are different from your agenda. It's like a bad marriage or a bad relationship. It can be really difficult to get out of, and it can kill you. So I think we were given strong advice about choose your shareholders really carefully. But then, I mean, the one business person who's had the biggest impact on my career, and somebody who I still see occasionally, is the current chairman of Westpac, John McFarlane.
Yep.
John's is a career banker. He was a CEO of ANZ Bank here about 10, 15 years ago. Chairman of Barclays Bank in the UK. I mean, a very experienced executive. And I learned a lot from him because I worked for him when I was in my early to mid-20s at Citibank in London. And you know, the things that kind of stuck in my mind is setting a high bar. You know, don't set the bar at a meter and where you can comfortably jump. Set the bar at 2 meters. And it's better to fail at 1.8 than succeed at 1 or 1.2. So set a high bar, because if you set a high bar, you might surprise yourself that you can actually achieve something that you never perhaps thought was possible. Be very strategic about business. Don't drift. Be strategic. Be resilient to the point that I made earlier. And embrace change and manage change. Don't see change as a threat, but see change as a necessary part of running a business. And a very strong strategic mind about what is it you're trying to build here and the importance of culture. And I can say, hand on heart, that I learned a lot from John over the years, certainly early in my career, but having then observed his career through different organizations, there are some strong and defining characteristics that never leave you, actually.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of other sort of business people or entrepreneurs that have sort of inspired you along the way, have you got any that come to mind?
Oh, there's a lot of people that have inspired along the way. I mean, I'm staying in the banking world. I'm a huge admirer of what Jamie Dimon has done at JP Morgan in the United States. Probably the best banker of the last 20, 30 years, although I'd put John in that category, up in that category as well. I'm a huge admirer of what Frank Lowy and the Lowy family have done here in Australia with Westfield. I mean, Frank's story, which is well documented, about coming to Australia, after the Second World War, with nothing, and then building an empire, a hugely successful business. A huge admiration for Frank and other people like that. But again, you learn a lot about resilience, because these things, when people look at success stories, you think, well, that was great. Look how well they've done. But success is a product of hard work.
Yeah. That's just one part of the result of the journey and the trials and tribulations of knockbacks and problems and solving things and but never giving up is the bottom line, right?
Never ever give up, and never lose faith in yourself, right? Because we're all defined by certain qualities, and our qualities and our motivations and our ambitions take us in different directions. But when you know yourself, warts and all, because none of us are perfect, and I'm certainly have got more than a fair share of blind spots, but knowing your strengths and playing to your strengths, and accepting that from time to time you're going to fail, but actually see failure as an important experience, not as a mistake, a disaster, but actually say, I've learned from this and it's going to make me stronger. And backing yourself, the ability to be confident in who you are, warts and all, I should have been more confident in myself earlier in my career. I kind of built my confidence up over time.
Yeah.
But you know, there's an old saying, I can't remember who said it, but you know, youth is wasted on the young. And I wished, if I was looking back, that I'd have been a lot more confident in myself
Yeah.
then, say 20 years ago, than as I am now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But it's funny because part of that journey is also what gives you that confidence at whatever point it comes, right? Because you can't sort of miss steps.
Correct.
Because there's lessons that you might not otherwise have had and all those sorts of things. But you're quite right. It's you look at my kids and different things. You think you'll just do that. And it's like easier said than done, right? Because you've got extra 20 or 30 years on them, and you can see, well, you can just try that. That doesn't matter, but to them it does. You know, you've got to get to that point down the track. It's all of that sort of stuff. It's a learning curve.
Yeah.
What about books? Any great books beyond? Well, we've got Black Belt. That's number one for listeners.
Yep. Black Belt's a highly recommended read. I'm an avid reader, but when I think of the business books that I've read over 30 odd years, and if someone said to me, which book would you recommend? I would recommend without hesitation a book written by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah, great book.
That book I think there's sold about 40 million copies. And it's still, if you walk into any bookshop, it'll be there. And I pick that book up every couple of years and read it.
Yeah, same. It's absolutely must read, must revisit.
Yeah. So that's the one that I would get. If there was one book I could recommend. It's more than a business book, but the principles go back to how you should be thinking about yourself and about how you should be thinking about leading.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the title itself, especially for younger people, it comes across as a little bit boring. It's not fancy, but the lessons within the book, and there's so many of them, are really profound, just
Absolutely.
in terms of how to operate, how to manage time, how to think around things. It's even just perspective on things. It's just a brilliant book.
And starting with the end in mind.
Yep.
And also putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So, you know, one of my favorite pieces of advice, and actually I was in a meeting about an hour ago inside the bank, and I said this to people: before seeking to be understood, seek to understand, right?
Yep.
So instead of saying Charlie's a pain in the ass, he's not cooperating, stop. Ask Charlie, try and understand where Charlie's coming from and why he thinks that way. And then once you've done that, then you're in a position to form a view. But too often we kind of default into a view without much information, and quite often so little understanding of where the other person's coming from. I mean, I do it all the time.
Yeah, it's easy to do, right? And I actually think it might be in that book. There was a story I remember that stuck with me. I think it's in that one, talking about exactly that point.
It's
where he said,
you go.
No, he was on the train or the bus or whatever it was, and there were kids running up and down the aisle, and the parent wasn't paying any attention. And he was getting more and more annoyed until the point where he said something about it. And I said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I'm in a daze. My wife just died, or my wife just got cancer, or whatever it was." And he went, "Oh, wow." Suddenly his whole perspective on it changed. And that stuck with me, that story, because you just don't know what other people are dealing with. And when you zoom back out a little bit, it doesn't matter as much as what you think at the time, right?
Spot on.
Yeah.
But these are lifelong lessons that in Covey's book that will serve you well in all aspects of life.
Yeah. The other one that I love on the topic of resilience, I'm not sure if you've read this one or not, is Grit by Angela Duckworth.
Yes.
That's brilliant. That's really good. That's the one where, if people say to me, what's the one book? It's not necessarily a business book, but it's the one book I would get my kids to read. I have sent it to them. I don't know if they really read it or not. But that's the one book that I would say, if you read that and you've got that resilience, it's a little bit like culture, right? Resilience in that way is one of those things that if you understand how to be resilient, how to have that grit, then you can solve most things. You can stick with things long enough to make whatever else you need work. You know, that's a really good one. What about what's next for judo in the next 5-10 years? What's ahead?
Well, we want to build this into a world-class SME bank. It's, you know, when we were designing the bank back in 2016, we saw 3 horizons. Horizon 1, 2016 to 2021, was build a bank, get a banking license, get to market, and demonstrate that you can attract customers and you can make money. And then Horizon 2, which is 21 to 26, is then invest in the infrastructure of the bank so we can scale it. And which is where we are today. Continue to grow, but build the bank for scale. And then Horizon 3, which is 26 and beyond, is demonstrate world-class SME, world-class bank metrics, you know, and that, so we're never going to be the biggest bank, because that's not a measure of anything really.
Yeah.
But we can be the best, you know, we can be the go-to bank for small to mid-sized businesses.
Yeah.
And you know, we're not seeking size for size's sake, but the one thing that's been a huge source of pride in the very short history of Judo Bank is that we have attracted some amazing people. You know, really good bankers who were so frustrated with the bureaucracy and lack of customer centricity in the big giants, that they came to Judo with real passion, real purpose. And they're not here as employees, they're here to help build something special. I keep on saying to people, look, if you want to work in a world-class asset bank, come back in 4 or 5 years' time, and we might have a job. But if you want to help build a world-class bank, join us today. And then when you look back on your career, you're not employee number 34,020. You spent a big part of your career building something special that's made a difference to the small and mid-sized business economy in Australia. That's a source of pride and achievement, versus saying, I worked for a bank for 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah. Yep, I love it. I think that's really great to hear, and there should be more of it, because I think that's what people generally would love to have in terms of their business relationships, that type of mentality, as opposed to the faceless screen or the phone and that type of thing. So I really love the way you guys go about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joseph, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been fantastic. We've loved your insights and hearing about the journey that you've had, and also Judo Bank.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks very much.